Well, joining us now on Al Jazeera is Zeidon Alkinani, a lecturer in Middle East politics at Georgetown University here in Qatar. Thank you so much, Zeidon, for being with us. What does Israel's resumption, quote-unquote, of the ceasefire after such a deadly attack signal about its objectives?
Well, it signals the very same concerns many people had from the early stages. There isn't an actual developed, mature intention in actually ending this war. Violating the ceasefire just reflects and indicates Netanyahu's insistence in continuing this war in order to be able to continue rationalizing further violations and further annexations of both Gaza and the West Bank.
Do you think the ceasefire will ultimately collapse?
Well, it has collapsed if we think about it practically. Theoretically,
Donald Trump says it's still strong, though.
Donald Trump is defending it as much as he can to ensure that he keeps that trophy, keeps that victorious element and image and reputation that he was showcasing in Sharm el-Sheikh. Also trying as much as he can in a way, or indirectly or directly, telling Israel and telling Tel Aviv that there are business enterprises, there are economic promises that has been promised to the region, to regional allies and leaders, that even Israel has to pretend that it believes in the interest of DC regionally and globally. I wouldn't call it as U.S. pressures more than U.S. economic interest that is being put in front of Netanyahu, and expecting Netanyahu to be also interested in the U.S. interest here.
So do you think this current U.S. approach of ceasefire first, talks later is ultimately doomed to repeat the same cycle of violence?
Absolutely, because we haven't created drastic solutions here. We're creating short-term solutions to ensure that business enterprises and a transactional interest is being overplayed and ignoring the humanitarian crisis, ignoring the political issues that accumulated the events that led to October 7th from the first place and led to the political crisis that we're witnessing today.
What about Hamas, Zeidon? What are its current calculations? We're still in phase 1 of the ceasefire. We're supposed to be moving into phase 2, which would see Hamas disarm and this international stabilization force go into Gaza. Do they also gain from being in this phase still? I mean, from this pause in between these two phases?
Well, Hamas as a political entity has been noticing a regional and perhaps an international recognition that this is a potential political entity that the world has to deal with in a post-war Gaza, a post-Gaza war strip, given that a lot of different opinions have been clashing against the proposals that included political members of the Palestinian Authority or other exiled Palestinian politicians that may have closer relationship with the Trump's administration. But Hamas has been put in a position where it has to follow the ceasefire and follow the conditions that is preconditioned and presented by the Israeli entity, whilst Israel is ignoring the ceasefire and continuing its attacks. It may be a bit less, but it's still an attack. It's still a humanitarian crisis. There is still a blockage on the humanitarian aid. Business as usual, but perhaps a bit less, ensuring that they could buy a bit more time from the Sharm el-Sheikh.
Is Hamas trying to buy time, you think, going into phase 2 of the ceasefire?
I think Israel is trying to buy time in order to be able to continue business as usual. Hamas is trying to follow whatever has been agreed. They were going business as usual in the post-ceasefire talks, ensuring that they would do the swap of captives and the prisoners from the other side. But given that Israel insisted
But what
on
about the issue of disarmament, which is in phase 2 of the ceasefire, the issue of Hamas laying down its weapons?
Of course, but we never witnessed phase 1 being practically implemented. Therefore, it will be difficult to talk about phase 2. We never witnessed the drastic elements of the ceasefire from the first place, which was an end to the war, an end to the genocide, and a serious recognition of a Palestinian statehood. And none of that has been evident so far.
Briefly, what leverage do mediators like Qatar and Egypt still have to restore this ceasefire and make it stronger and move forward to the next phases?
Well, they continue to do the work as much as they can. They have been managing these talks perhaps in different levels for the past 2 years. But one detrimental issue that the region and regional allies will have to also rely on is Trump's insistence in ensuring that there is an official or an informal or formal accountability mechanism that would ensure that Israel is following the rules of whatever 20 or 30 leaders were discussing and promising each other in Sharm el-Sheikh. Trump seems to be focused on his Asia trip right now, and that is a high risk given that the Washington, D.C.'s focus on the MENA region might decrease with time, and that might allow Israel to continue business as usual prior to the truce.
Zeidon Alkinani, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for speaking to us. Zeidon Alkinani is from Georgetown University in Qatar.
For more on this, we're joined on set by Zeidon Alkinani, a lecturer in Middle Eastern politics at Georgetown University here in Qatar. Good to see you, Zeidon. So, fresh Israeli strikes overnight. How close are we, in your opinion, to this ceasefire collapsing?
Well, very close. The violations to the ceasefire has been constantly happening, similarly to previous violations of previous ceasefires, even prior to October 7. The question is, when will the U.S. finally admit that it needs to take a firmer stance against Israel's confidence of feeling that they have the impunity to continue to do whatever they want?
Tell me what more you expect from the United States. We've seen over the course of last week numerous politicians from the US come through Israel, lots of comments from Donald Trump. What else should the US be doing? And not just the US, the other mediators, as we heard in Hani's package there.
Well, to start, we should look at the closer picture rather than proposing a long-term plan and ignoring that the continuation of the political violence and the genocide and the strikes are continuing. Humanitarian aid continues to be blocked, perhaps a bit less than prior to the truce, but still ongoing. And a humanitarian crisis is happening, and we're talking about the potentiality of a post-war Gaza in terms of business enterprises, construction, a potential authority that will be leading the Gaza Strip, without talking about the closer issues, which is on the ground currently, the humanitarian crisis and the military strikes that continue to be conducted. The U.S. is discussing a potential Gaza following the war, but ignoring that the continuity of the political violence and the airstrikes are continuing to happening until this very moment. Firmer stance needs to focus on controlling and putting Israel accountable to its current actions rather than looking at the long-term future.
There seems to be a bit of a vicious cycle going on here, with Hamas now delaying the return of the captives' remains, blaming Israeli violations. Is this a genuine response from Hamas, or are they too stalling?
Well, this adds back to the point of it doesn't seem like Netanyahu is interested in ending this war. If the remains of the captives all are delivered back to Israel, then Israel will no longer have any more evident or stronger excuses to continue its violations, continue its annexations of Gaza, of the Gaza Strip, and continue its annexation of the West Bank. This war needs to continue in the Israeli perspective in order to be able to rationalize its military conduct against both the West Bank and Gaza.
In terms of what Prime Minister Netanyahu is hoping to achieve with these strikes, is he, to one extent, trying to project strength and push back, in fact, on this U.S. narrative that they have control over Israel right now?
It seems like Israel or Netanyahu's government is interested in pushing back against U.S. interests rather than U.S. pressures, given that the rationale, most of the rationale which seems to be taking place in Trump's administration and being heavily involved in this war is the transactional interest, which is very evident, it's very vocal by Trump himself and his team and his close allies about the plans, the future plans of the business enterprises and the potentials of reviving Gaza through the investments that they are pushing for. Israel is trying to push against those interests, trying to buy as much time as possible, given that Trump's administration isn't only focused on the MENA region or Gaza today, it's also expanding its interests beyond across the world, as we noticed in the current visit of Trump, which is taking place in Asia right now, buying as much time as possible in order to normalize its actions, similarly to how they have tried and attempted to normalize genocide, similarly to how they have tried and attempted to normalize annexation of lands and the continuity of Israeli settler colonial projects.
Zeidon Alkinani, lecturer in Middle Eastern politics at Georgetown University. Thank you.